For those who don't know me, my name is Dan Rosenbaum. I'm the president of the chapter this year. I'm not exactly sure how I got that honor at this time, and it's turned out to be an interesting year for the chapter because we decided to kick off this event, which, if this night is any indication, we'll be doing quite a few more of these. Anyway, welcome to our first annual Silicon Valley Developer Hall of Fame. Before I kick off my remarks, and they're going to be brief because we're going to have a lot of fun tonight, I also want to echo Pat's appreciation to our sponsors. I called up most of these people directly and said, we want to have a really nice event. We want to keep our price of our tickets down low, and you guys need to underwrite the difference. So the reason we're having this nice dinner and the open bar and the nice wine and the dessert and the Starbucks coffee is because of the sponsors. So thank you to the sponsors. And yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I also want to thank Pat, who is our unsung hero at NIOP. For those of you who aren't totally familiar with what we do, we have some nice events. And Pat is our executive director, and this event's been a heroic undertaking on her behalf. So Pat, I don't even know if you're in the room. There she is. Thank you so much, Pat. This is the first one of these, and Pat stole a little bit of my thunder, but I do want to talk a little bit about why we decided to kick off a series that we're calling, though we don't have a building, but anyone who wants to throw a building at us is fine. We don't have a Hall of Fame, but we're calling it the Hall of Fame. Why a Hall of Fame and why now? Well, the first reason, in 2007, I wanted to see how many men in the room still had suits that they fit into. So a lot of you do, and I got mine on. I got it cleaned and it worked too. More importantly, and obviously seriously, there is a monumental, significant shift going on in the ownership and management of real estate in this valley. And it's patently obvious, and we know it. Our founding fathers, those few men and companies who formed and started developing real estate in this valley between 35 and 45 years ago, are transitioning to the next phases of their lives. Either they're selling significant portions of their real estate to companies that are headquartered outside of this valley, and San Francisco is outside of this valley, Jim, or they're transitioning management of their portfolios to their kids or to their younger partners, and usually a combination of the two. The stark fact is that in several years, the men who pioneered the commercial real estate industry in this valley won't be around as much anymore. Most won't retire, because who'd retire from this gig? But they won't be as active. So the board of the NLP felt that it was important to take a moment to reflect upon the significant role that a very few companies have had in shaping the look and feel of this valley. And we would suggest the role this valley has played in the international business community. Frankly, we wish we would have started this 3 or 4 years ago, but everyone was still a little depressed 3 or 4 years ago. I firmly believe that we work in the best industry, in the best place to work and live on this planet. It's true. I also believe that our good fortune for being in this industry the way we are is a result of the efforts of those few developers who did big things in the 60s and 70s. I'm not sure if the concept started here, but building speculative, flexible buildings that allowed tech-based companies to expand, contract, and change creatively was certainly perfected here. It was perfected here. You'd have to go back to the mid-60s to understand what a pioneering concept developing such buildings was. It was considered very, very risky and was not often attempted. Yet the honorees tonight and all those that will be inducted in the next few years to come, and most of you are here, did just that. They took significant personal risk, worked tirelessly, had a lot of fun, and built our industry essentially from scratch, one sunburst rock tilt-up panel at a time. The birthplace of high tech became the birthplace of a new style of commercial development. And it all grew exponentially, just as Dick Peery, John Arrillaga, John Serrato, Carl Berg, Dave Brown, Ned Speaker, and others, many in attendance tonight, were coming into their own as business people. You can't really separate the tech industry from the buildings that house the tech industry, because they both change so much, so quickly. We on the board hope that these award dinners will become the place where people in our industry can come to add to the oral history that makes our business so special in this valley. It's a small one in terms of head count. Most of you are here. Everyone knows everyone. There are very few secrets. That's part of what makes it so fun. And oh yeah, you can make a ton of dough. Speaking of which, let's get to Dick and John. This event is purely focused on their commercial real estate activities. Tributes of, frankly, far greater significance are appropriate for their contributions to the community, charitable endeavors. John's work with Stanford, Castellet School, Menlo School, Dick's involvement with his church. It isn't our intention to toast those activities this evening, though we obviously acknowledge them. On a purely selfish note, this has been an absolute blast planning this event. Getting to know Dick and Jason and Dave Peery has been tremendous. Working with Jeanette, I don't know who Jeanette is. Jeanette has been absolutely amazing. She rolled up her sleeves really only about 3 weeks ago and said, well, this is what this really should be. And rolling up her sleeves is what she does. And obviously, it's a testament to her that a lot of people are here. Also, Tim Steele of Serato Development, who was working on a deal with Dick for quite a long time, really helped convince Dick and John that this was the right thing to do. And to be honest, for me at least, kicking off a series of Developer Hall of Fames without these guys first would ring a little bit hollow for me. So Tim, thank you very much. Some of the best hours I've spent in my 20 years in this business were over the last few weeks when Tim and I got to sit down with Dick and listen to him tell stories about John and his land acquisitions and development things and what have you. And I started the whole thing with the question, how'd you do that? And he said, well, it was just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we went this way and that way. But we did it while we flipped through these aerials that he had kept in his office religiously. And when we went in there the first time, Jason said, well, you can look at him, but you can't touch him. And speaking of aerials, that is an experience I'll never forget. And you guys are going to get to hear some excerpts from those sort of casual, impromptu conversations that we had, and that's going to be special. I believe Dick's quote when we were looking at those aerials was, if they had Google Earth when we started this thing, you couldn't have pried me away from it. And those that know Dick know that that's very, very true. Here's a little bit of a closer view of those loops that you guys have been watching during dinner and during the cocktail hour. And this is essentially the Golden Triangle, Silicon Valley proper. And as best as we could do, and I think we got close, this is the land that Dick and John, with some of their partners, all of whom are here tonight, have touched directly in this valley. I'm sure we missed some of it. To me, it's just unbelievable. Now, when I told Jane, my wife, we were doing that, she said, you know, wouldn't it be a little bit more unbelievable if you took a look at their land in the context of the commercially developable land in this valley? For me, that goes from compelling to amazing. It's a great story. So let's get right to it.
My uncle, Calvin Collins, he was the manager of the Stanford branch of the Bank of America. He says, you should meet John. John had built one or two buildings, I don't know, near the Central Expressway. I had just built my first building right on this corner. I started to build the corner building. It's about 11 or 12,000 square feet. John had another building somewhere about the same size he was building. We were both building it on spec. He was Renault and Hanley, great salesman there, did a good job, and so my uncle said we should meet, and we had lunch, and we decided, hey, I was doing this building, he had one over there, why don't we just go 50-50? We started with this building on Vaqueros. This street was put in by an assessment district, and we built with Siri kind of, you know, he had here, and all down this part, and we joint ventured with him. We had a deal with Frank that he had to sign all the checks with us so he couldn't get hurt, and we couldn't go ahead with the second building till we got the first building built and leased. And when we got that one done, then we could build the next building. And we had to take at least a building or two down a year, you know, build a building a year, or the venture ended. You know, we had to do the whole thing in 5 years. I think we went through the whole thing in 2 years. We did the first building, and you have to come down and kept signing checks. After by the second building, he just brought the checkbook back and said, hey, just do whatever you want. Do whatever you want to do. And we didn't have any money back then. We started our joint venture with $2,000.
I want to thank everybody for having this wonderful party for two good guys. I tell you what, my word was brought these two guys together, just a handshake. And I'll give you a little history of how it happened. We used to be in East Palo Alto with a nursery, and we were thinking of expanding, so we bought this property in Sunnyvale. And it wasn't adjacent to the Peery family, but there was one other property, and then the Perrys had the other properties. And one day, I happened to meet Dick. He was always traveling around with his car, looking at things, and so he still is, I think. So we got together and talked, and he said, hey, I'm almost through developing my folks' properties. How about going in and try to develop on yours? I said, yeah, that's okay. And I said, I'll tell you what, I won't, if some other broker approaches me, I won't give in to them. I'll take them to you because I promise you'd be the guy to develop it. And so that's how that happened. Well, not exactly. Pretty soon, why, this fella from Renault and Hanley, a young fella, he had a lot of hair at that time. What happened, John? I still got mine. Yeah. Well, anyhow, I took John up to the, I think he had Hewlett-Packard looking for a place to put up a building and whatnot, and so I said, John, it's okay with me, but firstly we got to go and see Peery because I promised if I did anything I'd let him know. So I took him up to the office, and they got talking, and then I left, and pretty soon, why, the whole three of us got together and we formed a joint venture deal. So that's how that happened. So, but going back again, I've always kept my word. I'm 91 years old, and I've always kept my word. I've always kept my word. A handshake was enough for me. If the guy was no good, you could have stacks of paper and all, and signatures and whatnot. But if the guy himself is no good, the paper's not worth a damn. Anyhow, I couldn't have tied up with any better fellas than Dick and John, I tell you that. They've been friends all through this time, and that's a lot of time, 40-something years, I guess, John? At least. So, let me see here now. Oh, something about being, dragging me. Oh, he dragged me to a house that he sold to me after. He gets me out of the nursery. We had a nursery in East Palo Alto, and he says, hey, Frank, it's time for you to get out of East Palo Alto. I said, well, I'll go take a look, It was dark, And I said, how are you going to look at the house when it's dark? He said, well, I'll fix that. So he rings the next door neighbor. He knew the next door neighbor. He borrowed a flashlight, and he showed me around. And I said, well, okay, I'll get the approval of the wife, and the wife seemed to go for it. So that's how and I'm still living in that. But another thing too, those two guys helped me. We had, the house was built with a narrow kitchen in one garage. And John got there one day and said, hey, this kind of narrow here. Let's widen it out. You know, leave one wall up and we'll put another wall and widen it out. And he got his sledgehammers and crowbars and what, and him and Dick were over there knocking. Yeah. So, but it ended up, we knocked it down, and I put a basement in it and whatnot, and I'm glad I did. So, yeah, and I'm sure honored to be here with John and Dick, and if anybody wants to get tied up with two guys, I'd recommend it. And another thing, too, I think it's about time somebody wrote a book about those two guys. They did so much here in this valley that I think somebody should write a book about them. With that, I'm going to close, and good luck, and thank you again for inviting me.
Well, I'll tell you, one story that would be typical of John's excitement would be when we built for, I guess, Intel in Moffett Park. And they had a building requirement that had to be done very fast. I think 5 months to build it or something like that. It was like, I says, John, what do you think? Can you do it this fast? This is pretty, you know, it's in the middle of the winter too. And I can do it, I think. They had a penalty clause, I think, of $2,000 a day. I think we had 5 months to build it. I can't remember what it was. But if we finished it ahead of time, we received a bonus quick, and it was in the middle of winter. It seemed like it rained on the days when the concrete was curing. The walls went up. I guess when we got done, this is the check that's for like $135,000. What does it say on the back here? It says, payment for early completion of Matilda building. This is in 1974. Yeah, $135,000 was a lot of money then. Noyce, who's the chairman and a very fine man, it says, his quote, "You make money where you are dominant, where you're not, you lose." Someone gave us that after. This is a building from a dead start. And I think that was 2 months early. I think we had 5 months. John had done that. And the way he had it, he organizes and gets it, and he's the best. Another example of John's expertise in building, which is paralleled by no one, is a Stanford Stadium. Everyone has witnessed that firsthand. He built that whole stadium in about 9 months, which is almost impossible. I don't even think anyone has even come close to a standard like that. Did it at rock bottom dollar with a tough winter, and working with Vance Brown closely, they accomplished the miracle. There is nobody that can build with the speed and put the manpower together like John. He's the best.
I'm Allan Brown, and I'm a lot younger than Mr. Siri, but I have had 45 years of experience with John Arrillaga in construction. And a little later I'm going to tell you about the first building that we built. One of the things about our relationship, it's been, we have not had an exclusive relationship on building for John, but we have in the recent years done almost all of their buildings. We've done hundreds of buildings and millions of square feet. And the interesting part of that is we have quite often given them a contract, but we've never received back from them a signed contract. I think that's a level of trust that you won't find matched very many places. We've also, I can say, we've had dealings with a lot of developers who would allow us to have a little higher fee than maybe Dick and John, but the thing that's unique about them is they always pay their fee and they always pay their bills on time. That's worth a lot of time, a lot of money to have a relationship like that. And even more so, the decision making that comes from John Arrillaga on the construction jobs is worth an immense amount of money. If, for example, the stadium, no one could have built that stadium if they had a committee to work with, if they had to go through the usual, say, Stanford University's building staff. We had a czar, so to speak, in the name of John Arrillaga, and that's how we were able to do that project. I met Dick a long time before I met John. He was a tow-headed kid when my father and I had gone over to H. Taylor Peery's home on Webster Street in Palo Alto. to talk about building a store building for Mr. Peery on Cambridge Avenue, and Dick was a little tow-headed kid, came in and stuck his head in the door. That's the first time I met him. It was much later that I met John Arrillaga. My brother and I were sitting in our little office on Park Boulevard, and this new Mercedes convertible pulled up. I was looking out the window, and this tall, as already mentioned, tall young man with a full head of dark hair. He had a tweed suit, three-piece, and a beautiful paisley tie. He walked in the front of our little building and introduced himself to the girl out there and said, "I'm John Arrillaga, Arrillaga. I've heard John, I've sat in his office and heard him say that probably 50 times on the telephone. He never says it with any irritation at all. He's happy to repeat his name and understands that people may have a little trouble spelling it. He came into our office and said, "I'm John Arrillaga, and I have just joined Renault and Hanley Real Estate over here, Industrial Realtors on El Camino, just 4 blocks away. I was driving around. I saw your sign, contractors, and I wondered if we could do some business. Do you have any buildings to lease or buildings to sell?" And he said, "No, we don't." "Well, we do have a vacant lot that we bought for a potential build-a-suit, and it fell through, and we still have this over on East Bay Shore, Palo Alto." "Oh, you need a build-a-suit?" He says, "Okay, have you got a plot plan?" And we said, "Yes." And he took the plot plan and left. And I said to my brother, I said, "Well, I won't see him very soon because, as you probably know, a build-a-suit doesn't come that easily, and here's a guy just starting out." Well, 2 weeks later, John came into our office and he said, "Okay, I've got your build-a-suit, and here's what we're going to do." That's the way John actually loves to take charge. And he laid out, said, "We'll build an 8,000 to 10,000 square foot building, and it'll be a high bay for a warehouse tenant that we have. And how much can you lease it for?" And we said, "Well, gee, give us a week to figure this out." He said, "No, I need to know tomorrow morning." So I said, "Okay." Well, we worked on it, and the next day came in, and we said that'll be 12 cents per square foot triple net. And he said, "Nope, it's got to be 10 cents. He says, "Give us another night." So we worked that night and took our profit out of the deal, any job profit. We figured maybe we can do this without any cash flow during the 10 years. It was supposed to be a 10-year lease. So he came back in, and we said, "We'll do it." Well, true enough, 10 years later, we owned a building free and clear. The lease held up, and that was the last build-a-suit that John gave away. There was a little anecdote on top of that. John got his next build-a-suit, and he went down to the bank. Now, this is a little bit of hearsay. He went down to the bank and said, "I'm going to build this build-a-suit. I have this option on this land, and I have this tenant that wants to lease it, and I want to build this building." He said, "Well, Mr. Arrillaga, do you have any collateral?" He says, "Well, I have this lease, and I have this land lined up." He says, "Well, I mean collateral. Do you own a house?" "No." "Do you have any stocks?" "No." "Do you have any bonds?" "No." So, to make a long story short, he brought in a partner, Milt Iverson, and he did give half of that away, and that was surely the last build-a-suit that John gave away. He went on from there to great success, and we were a part of that. Every once in a while, he'd have us build a building, and he tried lots of other contractors. Within the last probably 30 years, we've done most of his work, and it's been a wonderful experience to work with John. Say a little bit about Dick. I think Dick is probably one of the shrewdest Philadelphia lawyers without a degree that ever looked at a lease. I remember one time I was down in his office, he was a little frustrated looking at this lease that had been marked up by an attorney with 50 changes on it, and he got out his pen and had these little appendages he put on there, and he says, each one would start out, "Notwithstanding anything contained herein, the following shall be followed in this lease." He straightened it out with a few flourishes of his pen. The other thing about Dick, I remember they were down in they're contemplating buying a big chunk of land down at the end of Hellier Avenue on the east side of Bayshore. And Dick took the head of development for San Jose, city of San Jose down there, and asked him what he thought of that. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. We'd love to have some employment opportunities for people that live in that part of the town. And we would certainly be happy to have you do that. We'd put in the extension of Hellier Avenue down there. So Dick and John bought the land, and a few years later, they were all ready to go for a permit. And they said, okay, well, you're going to put in the streets and curbs and gutters and sewers and so forth, aren't you? And Dick had, at the end of his conversation, after his conversation with the guy many years before, he had sent him a letter and said, as I understand it now, this is blah, 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 what we have understood about your willingness to do this and this and this. And if you have any, if this is not accurate, please let me know immediately. So he pulls out this letter, and San Jose put in Hellier Avenue all the way past there. Just an idea that maybe it's good to document your conversations with public officials. I heard a story that is probably not exactly on point with the role of a developer, but when John Arrillaga was at Stanford, he was an All-American basketball player. Afterwards, he spent a couple years playing basketball in Spain. He came back, and some of his friends had gone to Stanford Biz School, and he thought that might be a good idea. So he went to see a friend of mine. A friend of mine just told me this story the other day. He said, Charlie Anderson's his name. He was the dean of admissions at Stanford Biz School. John came in and said he thought he might like to go there. And he said, well, what kind of grades did you have? And he said, well, I had C's and B's and occasionally an A and occasionally a D. I said, okay. And he said, well, how are you at writing papers? He said, no, I never wrote a paper. He said, I always had one of my guys do it. One of the guys that work for me. He says, guys that work for you, who are these guys that work for you? Well, he says, while I was going to school, I always had a dozen or so guys that would work for me. I had the exclusive representation on campus for a couple of dry cleaners and a couple of laundries and a couple of newspapers we delivered. And I had the inter-campus mail. And Charlie scratched his head and he said, you know, John, he said, I don't think Biz School would do you any good.
So all of this was just, you look at this area, and this is like wide open fields and greenhouses. But the big thing came in here with Alfred Fromm. We got this first trade with Zydex, and he was very fascinated because we were always honest in what it cost us to build the buildings, the money he could make. And so that friendship became to be a very dear friendship with Alfred. This last piece that we had in here is about 70 acres, prime property. And here we would really let us cut loose with all kinds of big buildings. Even after I made this exchange, he kept telling me, it wasn't right or he couldn't do it, but he admired us and so on and so forth. And finally, I just couldn't seem to get it. Well, he had a building in Palo Alto. I think it was like 50,000 square feet. It had been vacant for 5 years. I said, Alfred, how about me? I'm going to get rid of that building for you over there. I'll help you lease it. I asked him what the best price he would sell the property for or lease it to. He says $600,000 he would sell the property. Or he would lease it for 13 cents or 14 cents a square foot. I said, if I get that one, then you're okay, you're happy. And I'll try to keep the expenses down. Well, when I was ripping it down, he must have thought I was going to spend $200,000 or $300,000 there. John and I got in there together and worked. We redid the petitions, just cleaned up the inside cosmetically, painted it, did a job, and we got 2 offers in there. One was an offer to lease for 20 cents. And another one is to buy the building for $850,000. So I went up to see Alfred. Ooh, he says, how much is the commission going to be? And I wasn't thinking about even doing it for a commission, And I said, well, hey, it's going to be 5%, it's going to be, or 6%, it's about $50,000. But hey, I got you like $250,000 more than you wanted. Is that okay? He says, yeah, that's okay. Then I says, now that we've established that, and I said, I didn't do it for the commission like that. I said, there's not any commission on this. But I would like to get my costs back. I paid the costs. He said, well, what was it? I was like 13,000 or something for all the painting. And I had the canceled checks with the receipts for the nails, the light bulbs. As soon as he saw the amount, he didn't want it. He was embarrassed to even ask anymore. And I said, the only thing I like is, I don't know, I hope someday you can figure out how we can own that property behind, because that's been my dream. And that kind of ended that, and there was nothing contingent, one on the other. We went back to see him. I want to buy this back property from you, and I'd like to pay you, like, I think it was $850,000 or something. And then he said, oh, Dick, he says, you know, the Coal Banker, all these people, they've been here. You know, they're like offering 38 or 37, and this is like $18,000 or $20,000 an acre. And so he says, well, would you boys like to talk about it a little more? So finally, you know, we talked. I says, John, I don't feel comfortable going out any more money on it. I mean, we want this more than anything, but if we get, we'll be overextended, I think. Let's just offer him $20,000 more, just as a token to show we're at least trying. And we went back, and we told him that we could do that amount. And he finally said, you know, he says, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I want you boys to have the property.
You've heard, and you're going to hear tonight, a lot about Dick and John's business and negotiating skills, foresight in buying and selling, conservative but bold business philosophy. But in my remarks, I want to tell you about the rest of the story. I want to tell you where they sought and obtained refuge from the pressures of business. I want to talk about where they were loved, nurtured, and healed. I want to talk about where they could turn for comfort, solace, peace, and joy. The things money and business success don't supply, because a man can't cuddle up to a cash register. I'm talking, of course, about their wives, Joya, Mimi, and Fran. First, Joya. Before meeting John, Joya was an accomplished woman in her own right, an attorney in Southern California. It was her boss that introduced them. He knew he had found a real lady who could match and complement John in every way. When they fell in love, she dropped a successful career and changed her focus to John. She has devoted herself to her marriage, bringing into John's life once more happiness, fun, balance, joy. Those of us who know Joy and John all realize how extremely lucky John was to find such a beautiful and wonderful wife, strong and capable, but so devoted and loving. Now, Mimi, Dick's wife of approximately 40 years. Mimi brought children into his life, Denny, Jason, Jennifer, and David. An accomplished pianist, she brought music and culture to Dick. She made it possible for him to invite a wide range of people into their home, something they continue to do this day. People who needed a boost, a roof over their head, the warmth of a home, a warm home, filled with love and acceptance and beauty. She has provided love, support, and understanding to a unique and talented man. Now, Fran, John's wife of approximately 30 plus years. Fran is the mother of John Jr. and Laura. A school teacher before they met, she offered John refinement and culture. She showed him the importance of balance between business activities, home, and family. She provided love, appreciation, and understanding for a strong and sometimes complex man. She exemplified community involvement and altruism. I have often suspected that John's interest in philanthropy began when he saw firsthand the good Fran provided to our community by her service. I want to tell you a little interesting story about Fran and primarily about Dick and John and I. Looking back on it, I realized this whole thing was planned way in advance. Fran was on the board of the YMCA in Palo Alto. She was the chair of the board. The Ross Road YMCA was badly in need of renovation. Fran, I think again with great foresight, got me on the board. Once I got on the board, she talked me into getting Dick on the board. You see how things are beginning to line up? Before I knew it, I was the chairman of the finance committee, responsible for raising the funds to renovate that building. She said, "You've got to go talk to John. You're the only person he'll listen to and ask and accept an offer or accept and ask for money." So I made an appointment with Dick and John. Dick told me, and I've known Dick for 51 years. Dick said, "Now Boyd, you can come down and meet with us, but I want you to know that we've already decided how much we're going to give. I'm going to give no more than $50,000 and John's going to give no more than $70,000. I just want you to know that before you come." I said, "Okay." I didn't tell him that my job given to me by Fran was to raise $1.5 million. So I went down and was told that it was a very rare opportunity, a very unusual thing for them to both meet with the same person at the same time. I thank them for the great privilege of doing that. I then proceeded to make the ask and was told, as I had been told before and warned, that it was $50,000 from Dick and $70,000 from John. Now, I didn't know what I was going to meet down there. I had no idea how I was going to answer that question when I got in the car and drove down there. But suddenly the idea came to me, and it was a sincere offer. I said, "Well, you know, I appreciate that money you're going to give to the YMCA, but I've got to raise $1.5 million. Remember, Fran was the one that told me. I said, "So here's what we're going to do. They don't need to know where it came from." I said, "You put up 50 and you put up 70 and I'll put up the remainder and we'll say it came from the three of us." And John said, "Wait a minute, Boyd." He says, "Go out. We need to talk here." So I went outside and I was ushered back in. And John said, "I'll tell you what, Boyd, we're going to do it. We're not going to do that. We're going to build the whole building." I said, "Wait a minute, I don't want to do that. That's a little more than I bargained for now." But at any rate, the Y got built, and I've often looked back on that, realizing that 2 or 3 years in advance, Fran had this whole thing set up. She set me up, I set Dick up. The whole thing was pre-planned, and the Y's there today.
Dick, John, congratulations. It's an honor well deserved. For those of you out there that don't know me, my name is Bert Valdez. I'm a painter. I've been doing Dick and John's work for 34 years. When I started out, you're not going to believe this, I was 6 feet tall and had black hair. 34 years later, I'm 5'5" with gray hair. These guys are tough. When I first met John Arrillaga, I walked into his office, asked for an appointment, and the reason I was there is I got a lead. They said that there's these two guys that are doing a lot of developing. They're up-and-comers. They've got a lot of work going. So I made it a point to make sure I got by, and as luck would have it, I went in to get an appointment, and they buzzed John. He said, "Well, send the guy in." So I walk in and introduced myself. I said, Mr. Arrillaga, I'd like to bid you work." He says, "Sure, sit down, we'll talk." We have this conversation. He says, "Well, Bert, you know, everything I do is on unit cost. You know, and if you want to do my work, you got to quote all these different units, and if you give me good numbers, I'll let you do some work." I said, "Fine. Give me the list, and I'll be back in a couple days." He says, "Great." So I go back, and sharpen up my pencil as always, give him the units, and he says, looks like we can do some business together. I said, that'd be great. So I go out, he gives me a couple jobs, and each time you finish a job with John, you'd walk in the office and you'd have a summary, and he would check it. He'd measure everything that you did and before he'd pay you. So as time went on, the jobs got bigger and bigger, and I'd come in and the price would be more and more naturally. And so he says, Bert, I think I'm going to measure this one today and spend enough time on it. The others I just breezed through, but this is a pretty good sized job. I said, okay, no problem. So he unfolds the plans and he starts measuring. And he's through and he says, Bert, the way I see it, you have too much wall area. And it looks like about maybe $300, $400. So I'll tell you what, we'll just knock 400 off and you can be on your way. I said, wait a minute, John, I need all the money. He says, well, Bert, obviously you made a mistake. I said, just a minute. I said, did you notice when you were measuring? You got these big hands. Your thumbs are twice as big as mine. Every time you pull the tape to measure a wall and turn, I said, I'm losing a foot, 2 feet. That's why I'm coming up short on the wall area. He says, Bert, I don't agree. I said, well, John, I'm not leaving unless you pay me all the money. He says, well, why don't you just sit down because I'm not going to pay you the money. I said, fine, I'm not leaving. He says, I'm not paying. So we're sitting down there. It must have been an hour. And he's talking, taking care of business, and I'm just sitting. I refuse to leave. He says, Bert, how's the family? I said, oh, pretty good, John. Thanks for asking. Good, good, you know. So a little while, Dick buzzes John on the intercom. He says, John, you remember that land deal that we looked at last week in Sunnyvale? He says, yeah. He says, I just got off the phone with the owner. He says, I think for a mill we can put it together. John says, you know, Dick, I think that's a good deal. He says, yeah, me too. Okay, thanks. So I said, wait a minute. I'm sitting here arguing over $300 or $400, and you said a mill. Is that a mill like in $1 million? He says, yeah, Bert. I said, I'm not leaving now. So some more time went by, and he says, okay, Bert, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pay you the money just so you leave my office. I said, okay, thanks, John. So a check comes in. I go to the door. I turn around and said, yeah, but next time I'm measuring with my thumb, not yours. Dick, John, congratulations.
That occurred about every 10 minutes in John's office, I can tell you that. Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends and creditors of Arrillaga and Peery, welcome. It's truly a pleasure to be able to honor Dick and John for their tremendous achievements. Having been part of that for 40 years with them, not all of that in the business. Dick is primarily responsible for me being in the business. John is responsible for me being at Cornish and Carey. I think that you've heard a lot about Dick and John and these talented men. And Boyd hit it on the table in a lot of ways that these are wonderful people that are loving and caring family men and friends. My wife and I met Dick and Mimi in 1966, and Mimi's sister was my wife's roommate at college. And that friendship is something that is like Emerson said and wrote, a true friend is a miracle of nature, and Mimi and Dick are miracles. They have been wonderful friends for 40 years. And so Dick introduced me to John in 1969. I quickly sold John a telephone. I was with Motorola at the time. Dick was much harder to sell than John when it came to something like that. At that time, a telephone that you would buy was the size of a suitcase and went in your trunk. And they had cables that were about that big around that had to go up to where the telephone handset was. Well, John went ape when we tore apart his Mercedes to do that. But it was a special occasion. I went into business based on their recommendation and Dick's vision. Dick is an amazing guy, and when he's in his office, he's one guy. When he's with me driving around as a friend and talking openly about things, his vision was pretty amazing.
and I bought into it. In 1972, I came into the business. Shortly thereafter, I started doing deals with them, mainly because Dick and John promised me they'd support me. If I would leave a good job and go into a commission business, 3 children, house payment, they did everything they could, and I appreciate those early days. But there was a time, folks, when the Arrillaga and Peery empire was going to be severely challenged. They were building big time. You saw the Fromm acquisitions, the obligations they were making. They had very little money. The 73, 74, 75 recession hit them big time. And they had a lot of spec space up. They had tenants going Tap City. They were in big time debt, and they had big obligations. And Mark Davis, Ron Labatich, and I were close to them, and we decided that we needed to do something to help. And we got together some money, and we went to them and said, hey, you know, we'd like to invest with you. We think you guys are in pretty serious trouble, you know. And we have some ideas about, you know, how we can build on. We think you've left the basics of the business. I mean, you've got a Yugoslavian architect, okay? You got a construction firm in San Jose with a guy that looks like he just got out of high school, Jim Blair, you know. And I said, we got to get back to business here, real deals, you know. And so I think it only took maybe 6 months of hounding them every day to get them to do that. But we built 6 buildings, and we were leasing them like crazy. And I think John really, I mean, man, he saw what was happening. He said, I want to be part of everything you do. I want to see everything. Okay? And so, I mean, John didn't go to Arrillaga U to play sports, man. I mean, just in case you're thinking Arrillaga U is something different at Stanford, actually. And so we've been their partners for 30 years, and the package they just sold of $1,100,000 had our last buildings in it, which was probably about half the package, but I wouldn't worry about that. They didn't quite divide it up that way, but it was. You might, you know, in our country, the government spends $1 billion every 8 hours, okay? Now, if you were to, you know, I mean, we talk about these guys being very successful and billionaires, right? Well, if you were to take 1 billion seconds, that takes you back to 1959. If you were to take 1 billion minutes, it takes you back to the time of Jesus Christ. Now, that's a lot of zeros. You know, now Dick still has his first dollar. Now, John's a different story, okay? Dick is looking forward to the time when he can buy the farm at about 25 cents on the dollar, John. And it's not, when you talk about buying the farm, it's not him dying, okay? It's, you know, so he's looking for a special deal. I would tell you that at one point in closing here, my dad owned a 1956 Buick. And he and my mom went on vacation one time. And I decided I was going to lower the Buick. He loved this car. And so I took it to Menlo Muffler and had a coil taken out of every wheel. The problem was that we lived on a slight hill. When my dad came home and decided to drive out of the driveway, the car just teetered on the top of this driveway. I'll never forget when I was explaining this to him, he said, what in the world were you thinking of? This is pretty much what I heard from John every time we went in there to talk about a deal. What in the world are you guys thinking of, you know? It has been a special experience. Thank you guys very much for the education. You are wonderful men, and I've learned a lot. And thanks again. Bye.
When we went up to see these guys at the bank, we didn't even have a suit. John had to wear his wedding suit, and I was trying to mismatch my outfits to go in to borrow money for these big loans. One of our first loans was with the Bank of Tokyo. We borrowed about $200,000 to build a spec building, and they were really kind of worried about building a spec building, the very first building with them. They asked us what we would rent the building for, and I said about 10 cents. After the building was leased for about 50% more, incidentally, than we originally told the bank it would be, we brought the bank down to see the building, and they were thrilled. After that, we wanted to borrow for 4 more buildings. They says, it is a spec building? I says, are we going to do this again? No, 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 no. We never had another problem with the Bank of Tokyo, who later became Union Bank, and we got all the money we wanted whenever we wanted, and it was the beginning of a great relationship.
Hi, my name's Joe Parisi. I'm own Therma, and I've met John when he was still with Renault and Handley, which is more years than I'd like to talk about. I'm really not that old. And I have to say that having worked with John all these years, and Dick, that it's been marvelous. We've had some really fun experiences. And I have to say that John's probably the most talented draftsman I've ever seen in my life. He can get a tenant in there and draw up what they want freehand and faster than any architect in the world, honest to God. He's amazing. And over the years, it's been really fun to watch them. Especially Dick talked about, in the film there, talked about Intel's thing, and it was really a thrill. We would, from the day they started the building till the day that Intel moved in, it was 63 days. And it's absolutely, you know, that's from cutting the ground the whole way. There was nothing there. 63 days later, poor Intel guy just about fainted dead away because he couldn't believe that it was done, because they'd been used to taking a year or two to build a building up until that time. And so they've been wonderful at building buildings quickly, and it's been amazing to watch the two of them work together always, because they've got this dynamic way of getting things done amazingly fast, and always really fun to work with you. I've learned a lot. It's been a really great pleasure, and they've both been good friends for my whole life. And the best part of, I guess, the best thing that I can say about them is I've probably done, I don't know how much, quite a few $100 million worth of work for them. Never have had a piece of paper between us. Always got paid. And I think that's more than we can say about anybody else. So thank you very much.
But we had the land free and clear from one building, done 40,000, maybe 3 acres, and we got maybe 20, I don't know, something like that over here, and built all these buildings out, and with the land paid for, the buildings costing maybe 200,000 each. We went right down the street and built them all out lickety-split. This is the runway of the main airport, comes in here. This was really dicey leasing this at the time, because the planes would come into land and you could see them coming. I used to have to turn the radio up, and when I was showing it, you know, it was just as they were getting overhead, turn back and loop back around so you couldn't see those those landings. Then we argued enough, we got them to change all the touch-and-go landings from Sunnyvale to Crow's Landing. So it slowed the traffic down in here, because we were right in the flight pattern. That's why the golf course was here, so it could catch the planes if they crashed. Right. And we were the next ones in line.
Hi, I'm Drew Arvay, and I think that Brando and I should probably make mention of the fact that a lot of people in this room, a lot of brokers in this room, made quite a bit of money with Dick and John. Never at increments of over 100,000 at a time, but a lot of dough. 33 years ago, I was a 20-year-old, green, clueless, wide-eyed, deer in the headlights real estate agent trying to figure out how to string enough deals together to make a living. I know you're thinking nothing's changed except I'm older. But through those early years, there existed an urban legend. Peery and Arrillaga. There was a rumor that they'd made a build-to-suit in 2 months. They always got the highest rents. It seemed like they owned land at every off-ramp up and down Highway 101. And as mentioned before, you could always see their buildings from a mile away because they were clad in stone. And back then, I had more determinations than brains. I see John shaking his head. But they took pity on me, and despite my flaws, gave me some advice, took me under their wing, gave me some skills to help me survive for the last 33 years. And for all those early lessons, I am very grateful to both of you. There's one undeniable fact, and that is that they are both the shrewdest and the toughest negotiators on the face of the planet. And I don't think there's anybody in the room that would disagree. I have 2 quick stories to demonstrate that fact. Dick was good enough to give me an assignment, a task of assembling 26 parcels of farmland and orchard out in Mountain View, which is now called Shoreline. And I spent about a year talking to farmers and rolling my sleeves up, and it was pretty amazing. These guys, you know, they were out there tilling the land, but when you started talking about real estate prices, they'd go to the apricot drying shed and they'd open the door and there was a city zoning map on the back of the thing, and they transformed into a Boston attorney right in front of your eyes. And we were doing okay. We were paying about $8 a foot and chipping along, and Dick goes, okay, go get this street, but don't let these other guys know what you're doing. You got to get to all of them in one day. And so I'm out there, and we're starting to rack them up. And he goes, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to pull the trigger till we get them all lined up. And we were spending time going, okay, well, the land's kind of gonna run out here, and you know, you might do better down in Gilroy, and we'll help you trade and everything else. So we get 25 of the 26 parcels all tied up. And a quick note, Dick's looking over the escrow papers, and he caught a $50 error in the escrow papers. So I go to meet the last guy, and he says, well, I might sell. He says, I got to get $10 a foot. So I said, well, you know, that's not what Dick's offering, and John, I don't think is going to go for that, but I'll go back and tell him. So I run back, and I said, well, this guy, he wants $10 a foot, but I did the math. And it's a half acre, and I spread the extra $2 across the other 25 parcels, and it's 3.5 cents. It's nothing. You'll have the whole block, and you'll own the whole thing. And Dick looks at me, and he leans across the table, and he says, young man, he says, I want you to remember this. If you got the formula to turn shit into gold, you don't go out and pay $432 an ounce for shit. He says, you go back, and you tell him that I'm a buyer at $8, and at $10, I want to know whether he wants me to build a wood fence or a block wall around there. If you go out to Shoreline right now, you will see a guy sitting on a half acre with a block wall built around it. Now, if Dick was tough, John has the maybe equal with my father, the ability to make me humble every time I'm in his presence. And Dick usually handles the sales, and as most people know, John handles the leasing and the construction. But I had the good fortune one time to have a building that we had some folks interested in, and I think Dick was out of town or something. So I sat down, and John says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, if you get me this price, I'll sell. So I went back, and we came back with our contract, and we had full price. I knew better than to try and even wiggle a penny out of it. And so we put it in front of John, and John says, what's this? And I said, well, this is our full price offer. He's leafing through this thing. He says, this is 20 pages. I'm not reading this. He reaches in, he pulls out a page and a half, and he says, look, it doesn't take that much paper to put down the address, the price, and the day you're going to close. So he says, you fill it out on this, and he says, and then I'll take a look at it. I'm not reading that other thing. So they're complaining so the next time I bring the guy back with me, he says, look, you know, we really want to buy it, but I can't do this. John says, look, I'm going to give you a break. He says, you can have 6 changes on my form. Guy goes, 6 changes? He says, so they go off and they got 3 law firms from San Francisco and they're trying to squeeze every word and catchphrase, and they just grind on this thing for a week. They come back and they bloodshot eyes, and they just look like they'd been through the ringer, but they're just beaming from ear to ear. And we go in there and we put this thing on the table, and he says, we did it. 1.5 pages, 6 changes, and slides it across. John looks at it and goes, those are the wrong 6. I would like to thank you both for the privilege of having learned from you and worked with you, and most of all for the friendship. Thank you very much.
We had all the factors. John had the very same philosophy always. He was like, I mean, we were really, a couple of times we were going to do some really big expansions. I was worried about the debt. I said, I really worried. Well, will he feel the same way? He says, we shouldn't do it. You feel that way, and I feel the same. So we never had a conflict on being conservative. And I've been really blessed to have a partner that has the same philosophy. There's no, you don't wonder if he's, I mean, everything's down the line. You know, you can completely trust one another. There's no fast moves or something different. I mean, I don't know how many guys have partnerships like that. That doesn't happen. And then have fun doing it, and have complete confidence in one another. That's a big deal. Doesn't exist often. I've been real blessed to have him as a partner, and I think he feels the same way.
Well, my name is Jason Peery, and I'd like to thank Dan Rosenbaum and Tim Steele in particular for putting on such a great event. So I'd like to give them a round of applause. And this isn't the type of event that my dad and John feel too comfortable at. They're not used to being in the limelight, but I figure they've made other people feel so darn uncomfortable for the last 40 years. They can sit through a couple hours of this, can't they? Okay. Anyway. But no, on behalf of both families and on behalf of Arrillaga, the company, and Dick and John, I want to sincerely thank all of you for being here tonight. This is very touching for them in particular, I know, and for all of us, and it's very humbling. So thank you all for being here, all the speakers tonight just were so entertaining. I'm so honored to have been able to hear everything they had to say, and to have Frank Siri here, and Allan. You said that John made you do it, that first build-a-suit for 10 cents instead of 12 cents, and you took all your profit. He took all your profit off the table. Are you trying to imply that you've made a profit on our deal since then? Okay. This is a surprise to us. We're gonna have to talk about this. Okay. But anyway, as one who's worked closely with these two for the last 9 years, and who's known them both all my life, I just thought I'd offer a few brief personal insights as to why I think they've been so successful, and many of the things have already been talked about. So I'll be brief. But the one thing that's so interesting to me is how contrary they are to the conventional wisdom. The book smarts, they're the 2 smartest people I've ever known. But as far as the book smarts go, if you talk to them about net present value or internal rate of return, I'm not exaggerating. They have no idea what you're talking about. None. 0. So if you're in there and you're talking about those things, it's just not worth the time. They don't understand. And the way they see it, that net present value and IRR, these concepts, these are, as my dad says, these are just, fancy concepts that business school guys do to make a bad deal look good. So, and they're. So in their mind, if it's not simple, they're not going to do the deal, and they don't have any idea how to use a spreadsheet or how to fill one out or work one. Their calculators, they don't know how to use a business calculator. They know addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, and they know addition and multiplication a lot better than subtraction and division. So. Anyway, they're one thing that's been alluded to tonight, and was brought up initially by Frank, was the dependability of their word. I like to say that their word is like currency, like gold. Someone whose word is not good is like a Brazilian cruzeiro or a Mexican peso that just devalues itself. Their word is like gold, and you've heard how many people have said that we never even had a contract. Someone sends over a non-disclosure agreement, they just drop it in the trash. They say, "We told you we're not going to tell anybody. You don't need to have us sign this thing." And I just got a letter today from a broker, Scott Kinder, who couldn't be here today, and he asked me to pass the letter on to my dad and to John. And I figured that even though I guess Scott doesn't know that I'm reading this, but hopefully he'll forgive me. But he just said, "Dear Dick and John, I cannot attend the ceremony tonight honoring you into the Hall of Fame, so I wanted to send you a quick letter of congratulations. What can I say? Since this is the inaugural award, I think that they really should just give you the award and start a separate category for everyone else. You two guys have had more influence on the Valley than anyone ever has or ever will have, and I am sure that it's obvious to everyone. You've had a positive impact on me personally and professionally. So what I say in this letter applies equally to both of you. You've been very kind to me over the years, and I have learned a great deal from both of you. I've always appreciated your fairness and honesty. There are so many things that come to mind about working on deals with you, but the most important one that I want to share is that I could always rely on your word. If you told me something, I could take it to the bank. Your word was and still is a promise, and you always kept it with me with respect to every deal. John, when we made a lease deal, I tried to keep my mouth shut and let you do all the work, although at times I couldn't help myself and you would give me the look, and then I knew it was time for me to just sit back and watch you do your magic. Before I knew it, the tenant was saying yes to everything, and we had a deal. And Dick, working with you on the sale of the First Street building to Lucky Gold Star was a clinic on how to put a sale together from start to finish. I've thrown out most of my old files, but I kept that one around because I knew that I would need to look at it for references and ideas, which I have done so many times over the years. I mean, that's part of a letter that I just received today, but reflects again the strong level of trust that these two have built over the years, and how valuable their word has been. And while they're known for being tough, they're known for being fair. And I've sat with them individually and probably literally thousands of meetings, and I've never heard anything to the contrary. They've always wanted to treat everyone fairly. They won't go after a deal unless they get it at their price. But whatever they say, they'll honor every time. And I just wanted to say a brief word about their partnership. And I think this is has probably been one of the biggest keys to their success, because partnerships don't work out too well in most cases. It's very difficult to have a partnership. How often have you heard of a partnership that lasts 40 years and that, by all accounts, and according to them both, has not sustained its first argument? They may see things differently sometimes. They may have their own personality quirks, but they love each other, and they trust one another, and they respect one another. If they both don't feel good about something, they don't do it. And so many partnerships fail because of greed of one of the partners or the other. There have been many deals where one of them has done most of the work, and both of them have pulled together big deals where maybe they did almost all the work and the other one didn't do anything, or didn't do as much. And there's never one coming back after the other and saying, I think I deserve a little more here. I did more on this deal. Most partnerships do that. You have someone saying, I did more. Don't you think I should get more? It's always been 50-50, no one overreaching, both willing to share the credit, and that that unselfishness has been an amazing thing to see, and has kept them together throughout the last 4 decades. Finally, I just want to say that as individuals, they are at their core good men, and their success, I believe, partly you can call it, depending on how you look at life, you can call it good karma, you can call it being blessed by God, you can call it the practical result of prioritizing their lives, but they're good men. And I believe that a good deal of their success has come as a result of the people they are. They're eternally optimistic, they're generous to individuals, they're generous to communities with their time, with their means. They always have been. They put their families as top priorities in their life. They're revered by all of their family members, every single one. They've been faithful to their wives. They've been dedicated fathers to their children. And I can say, I don't think my father ever missed a single game that I participated in. I was heavily involved in athletics. He never missed a single sporting event, no matter how far it was away. And we had games in way up north in other states, and never missed a single one. And he was that way with everyone in my family. I know John was the same way. So in closing, thanks, Dad and John. You guys, again, you're so low key. So this kind of event may not be, your normal cup of tea, but I hope you enjoy it because you're surrounded by hundreds of people here who respect you, who admire you, and in most cases love you, including me. Thanks so much.
Well, I get to bat a little cleanup, and I'm going to get out of the way quickly. But just to get Jason and Lisa's explanation out of the way, kids, I'm sure that Drew meant that your dad said he was going to turn poop into gold. I just know it. I can't add anything, Jason, and I won't even try. So without further ado, now we have a Hall of Fame, and I'd like to ask Dick and John to come up and accept these, if you'd be so kind.
What can I say? It's always painful for us to do this type of thing, but we're very, very honored, privileged. It's been a real trip back in our minds and memories. It's grateful to have, sons in the business and so many friends that we care about so much and have had so many good experiences with. Thank you for your friendship, for your love, and for all the good business that we've had over the years as well. And my partner, I wanted to say too, how much I love him and what a unique experience it's been. We've been more like brothers than partners.
Thank you, Dick. I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. They said this was a legend. We were legends. I look around, and there's a lot of legends in this audience, a lot. But we really appreciate this honor, and it's something that I really feel wonderful about it. So I don't like to get up here and talk in public. I don't like to be in public, but I would like now to express my deepest love for my partner, Dick Peery. We've been together for over 40 years, and it gets better every day. We laugh every day. We tell stories about some of the things we've done. And if you want to be a legend, I think some of these stories are not on the right side of the track. But thanks again.